for us this morning, and thank you so much for coming.
Is this situated in a good place? Okay. Between melting and freezing, T.S. Eliot writes in Four Quartets, between melting and freezing, the soul's sap quivers. The dumb spirit stirs. This is the springtime, but not in time's covenant. What does it mean to be between melting and freezing? I've thought about it a lot since this phrase from Little Gidding, one of the Four Quartets, spoke to me for the first time after many previous readings in which it went by unnoticed completely. On that particular reading, it seemed to capture something of my recent life experience, both affectively and cognitively, a feeling tone as well as a way of understanding. Although now for the life of me, I find it difficult to get back to that instantaneous quick of connection between me and melting and freezing. What was I thinking of? One thing seems clear. Between melting and freezing is an in-between state, or an in-between condition. It's a time when things are neither frozen, solid, nor completely liquid. And being in between is a time of transition, the time of flow rather than stasis. In fact, you might argue that being between melting and freezing is the most between of betweens, because Eliot has chosen to use the gerund, or present participle, form of the verb, the ing form. The verbs are already in motion, in flow. So it is a time or state or condition of flow between two times or states or conditions. Not between frozen and melted, but between freezing and melting. Could it be that Eliot is pointing to that very moment, that instant, when melting shifts over into freezing or freezing into melting? It's a moment perhaps as elusive as another poet, Anne Sexton, would say in her book, The Awful Rowing Toward God. The moment when the exact moment when an awful headache goes away. At the close of this same section of the quartets, Eliot tells us that here is the intersection of the timeless moment. Here, he continues, and nowhere, never and always. And in another place in the quartets, he talks about the point of intersection of the timeless with time. I think that Eliot might be saying that the between is the intersection. That moment between melting and freezing is the point of intersection of the timeless with time. It's that being in between, and it could be any in between, any moment of flow or transition, is being at the point of intersection. I'm still trying to get back to the instantaneous quick of this connection between melting and freezing and me. So let me try to take it from a more personal angle. Some years ago, I had a conversation with one of my adult students, and that conversation stays in my memory till now. she had had to be absent from class because of some pretty serious difficulties with her college-age son. And you can imagine them, drugs, alcohol. In addition, she was working full-time and going to school 3 nights a week. And she had to turn in her final paper for me. She was in a time of crisis. It was one thing after another. So I shared with her some of my own reflections, since that very year had been a difficult year for me too. My mother had died suddenly, and I was worried about my father being alone after 60 years and so far away. And then my long-term cat was diagnosed with a possibly malignant tumor. It turned out to be benign, thank goodness. I had had to miss class too, unexpectedly, as my student did. And the reflection I shared with her was a moment of a kind of awakening for me. It went something like this. For a long time, I had longed for an extended space, an expansive time in which there would be nothing to worry about. Everything would be all right, and I would be able to enjoy life, do things I really wanted to do, and write poetry. I was telling a friend who had recently turned 80 that I feel like I'm surrounded by old and dying creatures, and I'm responsible for them. He replied, and you know, Jeannie, it only gets worse as you get older. So shortly after that, it suddenly occurred to me that there would never be that extended, expansive respite, that moment of rest I longed for. There would always be something to worry about. If enjoying life and writing poetry depended on that, I might as well forget both. So I think I was on my way home from the vet and thinking about the lab report that I would receive the following day. So it'd be my custom to worry about it all day and overnight. Then it came to me, something you probably have known all along, but I'm a slow learner. It came to me that I might get that expansive time I so longed for someday. If so, it would be an extraordinary gift. But what I have now are these brief respites. For instance, this very time between vet visit and lab report. It can just, if I can just sort of free myself up from the worry and appreciate these brief in-between times, these respites could be quite restorative. Well, so my reflection went with my student. And my student, in a remarkable amount of good nature, encouraged, because she had been through a lot, said, yes, I know. My pastor says you're either coming out of a crisis, going into a crisis, or in a crisis. And that is my second text this morning. Either coming out of a crisis, going into a crisis, or in a crisis. Yes, I thought intuitively that that's being between melting and freezing all the time. The pastor knows, and so does my student, that we won't get that longed for long-term period of rest and renewal. All there are these short intervals suspended between pole and tropic, melting and freezing, waking and sleeping, here and nowhere, never and always, as Eliot would say. We live in the between, in these moments of intersection. So the Bay Area psychotherapist and Zen master John Tarrant writes in his book called The Light Inside the Darkness. He writes, quote, "This is not because there is some malign energy in the universe. It is more a rule of nature. Darkness follows light and is followed by light. it is well not to take success as an accoutrement of the ego, or to take failure as a personal wound from the universe. The earth itself is between melting and freezing. Perhaps the melting and freezing in our own lives is the earth's weather. It comes and it goes, having little or nothing to do with our egos and our ability to control. So I do want to go back to Eliot's intersection of the timeless with times. What can I make of that, or what can we make of that? And what does it mean, the intersection of the timeless with time? It might mean that at any moment, an instant of time in which we're weighed down by the matters of the world, the dumb force of matter, to use John Terrance's phrase, at any moment, an instant of time can break open into eternity, into a sense of timelessness in which we're both ourselves and more than ourselves. We suddenly realize that we are part of this entire web of life. We're knit into it and stand in sheer appreciation of it. That moment is available at any place, at any time. To T.S. Eliot, it was standing as he was in England in the middle of the winter when there was a season of spring. This is springtime, he writes, but not in time's covenant. A springtime not predicted by the calendar or the clock or instruments of human control. A spring that's not malleable to the categories of human understanding. A blossoming of the cold. Between melting and freezing, the soul's sap quivers, Eliot writes. It quivers before the unexpected recognition that it is possible to transcend the human condition, to be both in and out of time, to stand at a point of intersection of the timeless with time. And he continues, if you came this way, taking any route, starting from anywhere, at any time or at any season, it would always be the same. You would put off sense and notion. You are not here to verify, instruct yourself, or inform curiosity or carry report. You are here to kneel where prayer has been valid. And prayer is more than an order of words, the conscious occupation of the praying mind, or the sound of the voice praying. And what the dead had no speech for when living, they can tell you being dead. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. Here, the intersection of the timeless moment. It's England for T.S. Eliot, and nowhere, never, and always. So it occurs to me that this quintessential experience of the intersection of the timeless with time is the moment of death, and that we get a glimpse of it when we are with a loved one. With a loved one. There was a program on death that I had seen recently on the public television channel, and it had to do with a woman who was herself going to die within 3 days. How she described her husband at the time of his death. And she said he had the most beatific expression on his face. All of the lines were erased from his face. It reminded me of what my father said about my mother when she died. It still seems very recent to me. With him on one side of her and me on the other, he said, she looks so beautiful, just the way she looked when I first met her. The intersection of the timeless with time. He saw it then. I couldn't see it. I keep trying to see in my imagination what her face looked like when the timeless intersected time. Since there is nothing but just this moment, the 13th century Zen master Dogen writes, and this is my last text. The time being, he says, the time being is all the time there is. Each moment is all being, is the entire world. Reflect now whether any being or any world is left out of the present moment. That's from a book of Dogen's writings called Moon in a Dewdrop, Moon in a Dewdrop. His understanding, Dogen's understanding of time coming from the Buddhist tradition isn't so very different from St. Augustine coming from the Christian tradition, who wrote in his Confessions that, quote, neither future nor past actually exists. It would be more correct to say that there are three times: a present of things past, a present of things present, a present of things future. It is customary, he continued, that though not correct, to speak of three times, past, present, and future. So Zen Master Dogen, in a similar mode, writes that it is customary for people to think the words, the time being, mean for a while. For example, for a while, for the time being, I plan to live alone, my father says. Actually, Dogen writes, vigorously abiding in each moment is the time being. And he writes it hyphenated, the time being, not for the time being. He goes on to say, all things in the entire world are linked with one another as moments. The time being has the quality of flowing. So-called today flows into tomorrow, today flows into yesterday, yesterday flows into today, and today flows into today, tomorrow flows into tomorrow. So it's remarkable to me how similar both of the foregoing quotations are to the opening lines from the Four Quartets, both St. Augustine's words and Dogen's words. In the Four Quartets, Eliot says, time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. So for Dogen, the time being, which is all the time and all the being we have, is that flowing moment between melting and freezing, when the instant and the eternal are one. It is that moment of intersection of the dead with the living, the moment of being knit into the entire quivering web of life. A moment as elusive as that very moment when the lines grew smooth on my mother's face. That's why there's nothing to do but to kneel where prayer has been valid, or to stand in sheer appreciation, as another poet, D.H. Lawrence, would say. And the intersection of the timeless moment could be right here, where you are, or nowhere. It could be never and always, because it depends on my ability to see it, to be aware of it, to vigorously abide in it, despite the dumb weight of matter and all of its attendant worries. It is, as my student's pastor said, there's no extended time free from crisis. We're always in it, going into it, or coming out. But even within crisis, there are moments of rest, peace, renewal, respites in which the soul's sap quivers, and the Spirit stirs. In those moments, we experience ourselves as being utterly subject to the human condition, between crisis and crisis, and at one and the same time, resting in the peace and renewal that transcend it. So be it.